Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the event today, which is the Greenfield Medal for you. And my name is Nigel Marriott, and I'll be hosting this session with Shirley Coleman, who won the Greenfield Medal last year. Before we get going, just to deal with a couple of housekeeping items. This show is being recorded and will be put up on the RSS YouTube channel in about 3 weeks' time. There will be opportunity to ask questions during this session. If you have an objection to your question appearing in the YouTube video when it is put up, then please let the RSS know. You can do that in the chat box if you wish. So let's find out a little bit more about what we're going to be covering today and have a look at the next slide. I am the chair of the Business and Industry section who is hosting the session today. Business Industry section was delighted to nominate Shirley back in 2023. We were one of her nominees, hence why we thought it was appropriate to host this session today. We are a section, as you can imagine from the name, are concerned with youth statistics in business and industry. We cover a wide range of topics on our committee, and so please do look out for our events if you'd like to see more of these events, or subscribe to the newsletter that BIS has started publishing since the beginning of this year. So without any further ado then, I think we should move on and introduce Shirley Coleman here. So first of all, Shirley, let me just say good afternoon and welcome to this event.
Hello. Yes, fine, Nigel. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So actually, I forgot one small point, which I should have mentioned. If you could go back to the previous slide. There will be opportunity to ask questions during this event. Can I ask that you please post your question into the chat box? The plan is we're going to spend about 20 minutes to introduce Shirley and find out more about the Greenfield Medal. And then Shirley's going to talk in some depth about the work that she's done that led up to the award and why she was considered a candidate for that. And then afterward, we'll have a general Q&A session. We're aiming to give at least 20 minutes at the end for that. But we will have short Q&A after 3 main sections, as you can see on the agenda here. I'll give more details on that as we get to those sections. So let's find out more about Shirley now, please. So we've got a couple of slides here just to summarize Shirley's background, but I just want to ask a couple of questions for you, Shirley. And I suppose we'll start with the obvious one. Where was it that you did you study for your BSc, Masters and PhD then, and when?
Well, I did them in Newcastle, and I originally came to Newcastle because it was one of the only universities that offered the opportunity for flexibility, so that you could do 3 different subjects in each year and still be in for an honours degree, whereas normally that counts as a general degree in the old days. So I was attracted to Newcastle because you could choose anything, and I initially chose maths, psychology and history of art, and came to Newcastle to do those 3 subjects. But having done a year of psychology and history of art, I realised there was a lot of reading and writing, and so I changed to maths, and so I just did the maths degree. So that's what I did in Newcastle. After the maths degree, I worked in a few different places. I lectured for 3 years in a marine college, lecturing maths and science. And then I worked in passenger transport executive, and then finally in the British Gas, which we'll talk about a bit later. And that was so inspiring that I decided to go back and do some more studying. And so because I was still in Newcastle, I went back to do an MSc in statistics at Newcastle again, and that led on to the PhD in Newcastle.
Yeah, that answered my second question. Is that then how you ended up working at Newcastle University then, your PhD?
Well, not exactly, because after the PhD, I went to Hong Kong and worked there for 4 years. And I was in the University of Hong Kong, and also I worked for Bearing Securities in the finance business centre of Hong Kong, which was fantastic in the stock exchange building. And then when I came back with my husband to Newcastle, I contacted Newcastle University and was invited to join ISRU, the Industrial Statistics Research Unit, which was very applied, and it was applied statistics. And so I started working there. And that is what has evolved into NU Solve, which is the sort of outreach arm of the School of Maths, Stats and Physics in Newcastle University. And so I became the technical director of that unit.
Ah, yes, okay then. So when did you join the university?
1990, a long time ago.
Ah, right. So I was going to say when you helped organise the conference in oh no, that's sorry, I'm jumping ahead to the next slide here. Well, I did want to ask you, the visiting academic. What is a visiting academic? I myself am not that familiar with the term.
Well, it's a number of things actually. The visiting, I was actually a visiting professor in Wrocław in Poland, and that was actually part of the European project. I did that for 6 months. And there we did a lot of training courses. So we trained, actually it was industrial people who were liaising with the university, the Technical University of Wrocław. And we joined them with the training. We were teaching them Six Sigma and statistics. In Ljubljana, which I currently am, I think it's just coming to the end of my second term as a visiting professor there. That's an involvement doing some teaching in research methods periodically. And I'm also involved in advising on a PhD in data science in retail. So it's a really nice role. Usually it's unpaid sort of association with the university where they invite you to do bits of work that could be paid or could not be paid, or just free advice. And it's very pleasant. It's a liaison with the foreign university.
Well, I know you are going to talk about networking a little bit later, so I'm sure you'll come back to some of that stuff. Let's talk a bit more about what you've done with the Royal Statistical Society. So it's a list of your involvement there with the society. When did you join the RSS and why?
Well, as soon as I went back to do the Masters in Statistics, I joined the RSS. So that was towards the end of the 80s, I think. So I automatically joined it because I thought it would be nice to mix with the other people who were interested in statistics, and it seemed the obvious thing to do. It's a nice society, and I've enjoyed being part of it ever since.
Yeah, so well, obviously we can tell you've obviously been very involved since then, and obviously you've covered a lot of ground in the RSS. Is there one particular part or role that you've undertaken in the RSS that stands out in your mind?
Well, the quality improvement section, QIS, has been close to my heart, and I've been in that for ever since, really, on and off, since about 1990, I suppose. And that's been really good fun, really interesting people. That's statisticians working in different businesses, in telecoms and in finance and in the medical world and pharmaceuticals and all sorts of things, standards and so on. But I suppose the greatest sort of honour was chairing the discussion meetings committee, because discussion meetings are when a groundbreaking academic paper is presented at a meeting and people are invited to discuss various points of it. And chairing those meetings, I did that for 4 years, just finishing last year. And that was a great honour and a great pleasure. And taking them all out to dinner after and talking about their papers was extremely good. So I think I enjoyed both of those two things the best.
Yeah, actually didn't check. It should worth mentioning for our audience here, quality improvement actually was a spin-off from the business improvement section, wasn't it? And you were there at the beginning of that then.
Yes, yes, just after it started. Yeah, I got involved in it.
Yes.
Yes.
And yeah, this is where I wanted just to refer to the Newcastle 2013 RSS conference, which you helped organise. And I went to that conference, but that wasn't the first time that you and I met, which was actually the MBIS conference in 2005, which was also in Newcastle, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I'll talk more about MBIS later, but MBIS does have an annual conference in different European cities, and we had it in Newcastle in 2005, and I chaired that, and that's when Nigel and I met on the second time, really. Oh, well, actually, it's the first time that we actually met, but our paths crossed, as I think Nigel might mention earlier than that.
At the British Gas Pipeline Centre, which will be coming up in one of the sections later on. It turned out we just missed each other by a few months working there. So let's move on and find out more about the RSS medals. Now, the Greenfield Medal is one of a number of medals and honours that the Royal Statistical Society awards every year, or in some cases every 3 years, which is actually the case for the Greenfield Medal. And as you can see, it says there, recognising contribution of statistical scientists to all aspects of the manufacturing industry. And, you know, it is basically awarded every 3 years for outstanding contribution to the effective application of statistical methods to the manufacturing and allied industry. If we move on to the next slide, it's established by Tony Greenfield, and I'll just mention about the timing every 3 years. Shirley was awarded the 2024 medal. It has actually just been awarded again this year to Nikki Beth, who I believe you know, Shirley.
Yes, yeah, our paths crossed briefly in the council, and I was very pleased to meet her then when I was on the RSS council.
Yeah, well, the reason why 2 awards are so close together instead of being every 3 years apart is that with COVID, the Greenfield Medal Award got out of sync. And so it's now being brought back in sync with the award to Nikki Beth for 2025. The next one will then be in 2028. The Greenfield medal we have a picture of it there, which is what now you've got one of those now, haven't you, Shirley?
Yes, it's very nice actually, and it's quite a nice heavy medal. It's like a Olympic gold medal, but slightly smaller, and probably not in gold, but it's very nice.
Well deserved, and as I say, BIS was delighted to nominate you for that. Actually, I'll move on to the next slide. I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about Tony Greenfield, because you knew him well. Why did he establish this medal? Why is there one named after him?
Well, Tony Greenfield was a most unusual person, extremely enthusiastic statistician. He was a polymath, quite outspoken, some ways a little bit of a maverick, but totally keen on statistics. Very clever, very involved with designed experiments, very good at talking about research methods, a very good teacher. He also wrote various statistical software packages as well as books, and also poetry. So he was a very widely skilled person, and he was actually started off his work really in journalism at one point, and he initiated and edited the RSS Notes, which was a brilliant little pamphlet of about 20-25 pages that was the precursor of Significance, and he edited that for a long time. He worked at British Steel at one point in time, and was very keen on quality improvement using statistics, and he actually started the QIS as a spin-off from the business and industry, as Nigel mentioned. And he was also a founding member of MBIS, the European Network, and president of that in 2003. So he was a very unusual, interesting person, great fun to be with. and started a lot of things. So he stuck his neck out quite happily and got things moving. And that's, I guess, was how the medal came about. He thought there should be some kind of appreciation of industrial statistics, and so he put this medal up to encourage it.
Yes. Do you know when that started?
I do, but I've forgotten. So,
Well,
yeah,
we have a photo, don't we, of you and Tony together
yes,
here?
yes, yeah, that's
So
Tony. You can see he always used to wear a pale suit and was always full of life. And this is Tony and myself looking around Chorus in Teesside, Chorus Steelworks. We were very keen on visiting places and observing what was going on and just seeing how statistics could help in the quality improvement of any industry. And we did a lot of trips together under the auspices of the European network, actually.
So I remember that suit. I think first time I met him was at Embis in Antwerp in 2010. Yes, he was a memorable character. We've got a photo of you being awarded your medal. I hope people can. These are all the medal winners at the Brighton conference to the RSS last year, and there's Shirley. As we hope people can see her there. But I wanted to ask you, Shirley, what did it mean to you to be awarded the Greenfield Medal?
Oh, I was delighted actually. I was surprised and sort of honoured and delighted, and I thought it was great fun. And to be amongst all those brilliant people receiving their medals, it was a great thrill actually, and very stimulating. It was delightful, and I never could see the point of medals before, but now I think I can, having got one. I think they are very, very nice to have, and it was very pleasant to be in that environment and receiving the medal. It was lovely.
Well, I was sorry I couldn't be there. I had booked for the event, but personal reasons I had to cancel the last minute. But I was certainly delighted to see you receive that medal. So we should now open this up if we go to the next slide. And obviously, I want to ask you, obviously, this award is for the outstanding contribution to the effective application of statistical methods in manufacturing and allied industry. And I wonder if you could just give us an outline of what you're going to talk about today, about how you reached that standard.
Yeah, I mean, Nigel mentioned about just talking about the Greenfield Medal and the sort of work that is involved in that sort of thing. And so that's what I just wanted to mention here, I suppose, the sort of stuff that I've been doing over the years. Mainly, I thought there was three aspects that would be worth talking about. One was about building networks with the various players that you can involved with applying statistics. And secondly, I thought I ought to give some sort of specific case studies, and then talking about the whole concept of transferring knowledge and transferring from academia to business. So that those are the three aspects that I thought I'd like to cover in this session.
Yeah, well, we're going to move into that now. But as I say, so I'll be muting my camera in a minute to give space to Shirley to take through. And I can promise you there's a lot of fascinating material there, some of which Shirley and I have some connections on. But Q&A, please do, as Shirley's going through, please do post question on anything that you Shirley prompt in your mind. Our plan is that after each of the three sections that Shirley just highlighted, I will pick some questions. If people have some questions, I will read them out. We won't turn your camera on, just for a time-saving measure, but I'll read them out, those questions, and we'll answer those there and then at the end of each of these three sections. But we're aiming to spend about an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes on those three sections in total. And then at the end, give ourselves at least 20 minutes for more general Q&A, where you can turn your camera on and microphone and ask the question directly, or I can read them out from the chat box, if that is indeed your preference. So, without any further ado, Shirley, I will hand over to you and please take us through.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, first of all, just talking about networking. I think networking is very important in applying statistics in business and industry. Not only is it important, but it's also great fun. I mean, it's a great honour to be able to talk about something that could be useful to a business and industry, and about which they often don't know, or they want to know more information. So it's a great thrill. And there are lots of different ways of networking. I do think it's an important thing if it suits you. And I've always liked networking, so it suited me. But there are various different types of networking, and one that is often forgotten is the local industrial forums. So chambers of commerce, various centres in this area. There's awards that are given out for innovative industries or innovative ideas. Northumbria Water is very powerful in this area and has a whole week of innovation that invites us to. And to go to those forums is such an honour, really, and such fun, because you can ask people about the sort of work they do and just think of how statistics could make use of their data, or could help them, or could be of use to those people. And so going to those forums, I think, is really worthwhile. It's worth the time that it takes. So typically there would be stands put up by different small businesses or large businesses, and they like to talk to you about the sort of stuff they do, and it gives you ideas about how you could apply statistics. And this is really useful for when you're doing research, or when you're doing short projects or providing student projects or student data ideas, making your teaching more practical. Then there's the various European and worldwide sort of projects, networks that I've been involved with. One is this European network of business and industrial statistics, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. But there's also a European CANSI group that I'm part of. CANSI engineering is where the emotional response of people to different aspects or features of the design of a product is analysed to help with the design of the product. And we had a very good European project looking at the design of shoes. What were the features that were very important to people, and what type of people liked what type of features? Clearly a multi-dimensional statistical problem, but one that statistics previously wasn't very much applied to. And so we have a little group that's looking at that sort of thing. Then there's the International Conference on Teaching Statistics, again, a worldwide association of teachers of statistics, where there's so many brilliant ideas that people have in how they teach their statistics, and they have a conference every 4 years. Then there's all the professional societies. Clearly you have to pay to join some of these, but I've always thought it's worth it. The Royal Statistical Society is my main one, but I'm also an elected member of the Institute of Statistics, International Statistics. They have conferences around the world, which periodically I go to if it's in a place that I like, or there's some particular reason to go there, like Cairns in Australia, for example, or in America. Then there's the Institute of Maths and its Applications, which has a lot of statistical type applications, and then the London Mathematical Society. So I think it's worth joining these associations just to mix with other people and to go to their various talks and be part of their community. And then finally, there's all the other professional bodies, Maths in Education and Industry. I was on their advisory committee for business and industry for several years, which was really interesting, looking at statistical applications in schools and school projects, really interesting stuff. And then there's the mechanical engineers looking at statistical engineering, and various other associations. So all of these things, you don't have to join them. I'm not a member of those different professional bodies, but I go to some of their meetings, and quite often I'm asked to speak at them, and so that's very good fun. And it's a way of networking, meeting people, and looking at how statistics can be used in these different areas. And just mention now Pro-EMBIS to get over the EMBIS thing. Pro-EMBIS was a European Union funded thematic network that the director of ISRU, Dave Stewartson, who was an absolutely brilliant director and managed to get funding for all sorts of incredible projects, he got funding for us to set up the European network. of Business and Industrial Statistics, NBIS, because he realised that there was a role for statistical practitioners across Europe to get together. And this association is going really strongly. It has over 4,000 members now, actually, and has different work streams and funds all sorts of things and provides all sorts of meetings and specialist areas, workshops and so on. And there's a whole webinar series which is free to listen to. NBIS is a free to join online community, but it does have a conference every year. I'm actually part of the scientific committee for the conference this year, which is in Piraeus in Greece in September. And there's also an interim meeting in Coimbra in Portugal coming up. So NBIS is fantastic because you meet people who are working in statistics in applications as well as in universities through around Europe. And it's so interesting to see how things are different in different countries. I think realizing the importance of networking is tied up with the importance of actual data. Quite often we're dealing with data in our projects. Sometimes we're looking at methods, sometimes we're looking at just data analysis. And my interest in data started with my master's degree in statistics, where I had the great opportunity to analyse some data from hay yields. So this Palace field is in Cockle Park. It's an experimental farm attached to or owned by Newcastle University. And if you look at the central picture there, that's the Palace field, and it's just grassland. And those strips are where the grassland was subjected to different forms of fertilizer. And the strips are organised according to a designed experiment. And the fertilizers have been given out in the required form ever since 1898. And so the experiment is to look at how the fertilizer affects the output. And so we have data going back right to 1898, looking at the hay yields. This is the kilograms per hectare, I think, of hay yields. And this is just 3 of the different plots. There's actually 12 of them in action. The higher one is where there was a lot of farmyard manure put onto the plots, and the lower 2, one is the control plot where nothing's added, and another is the where it was just potash. So you can see that over the years there's a lot of variation, as well as the overall change in level due to the type of fertilizer. And it's clearly fascinating to see what causes those variations. And clearly it's the weather is most of the influence. So we have the influence of the nutrition, but we have also the influence of the weather. And then there's a carryover effect. When you have a good year, it strengthens the roots of the hay, and that means that you're likely to have a good year next year. So what constitutes a good year for grass? Could it be the number of hours of sunshine, the rainfall in a particular type or a part of the year, and so on? All very interesting. So lots of opportunity for analysis. And agricultural statistics is really interesting, with a whole mass of people fascinated by it. In Newcastle University, we have an agricultural department, so there was an opportunity to do work with them. But it reminded me that each of those points in that graph comes from something like this, where these people have mown the hay, collected it all together. This is from the archives, so it was way back in probably towards the 1900s when they had horsepower. And it just shows that each of those points that we're so happy just plotting and analysing as statisticians came from something like this. So you've got all these people cutting the hay, loading it onto a horse. It has to be dried to a specified amount of dryness and then measured to get the kilograms per hectare. And that data comes to us. So I think when you're involved with statistics in business and industry, it's important to bear in mind how each of these data points is one. Tied up with that, I think, and spreading the word and getting to meet people is the importance of publishing. And in particular, I published a paper from this master's degree dissertation, but it was really interesting. I published that in 1987, ages ago. And then in 2017, I was asked to give a talk at the Royal Meteorological Society. And so I could use the ideas from that paper. If I hadn't had the paper published, I would never have remembered what I'd done or had the pictures from it. And so publishing is brilliant because it puts something in a permanent status. So I was able to give a talk based partly on that Pallises stuff. But it's also, I think, when you're looking at networking and getting things going and different projects, it's important to realise that methods can be used in all sorts of different ways. Compositional data, for example, was pioneered by Professor John Aitchison, who was the professor in Hong Kong when I was working there. And most of the examples were to do with geological specimens, looking at percentages of different types of minerals in soils, or looking at percentages of different types of soil in an area, like clay and sand and so on. But we also used it in this analysis of educational activities, and that was really fun, using a totally different method in a different context. We were looking at the time spent, the proportion of time spent in a lesson on exposition of the concept, question and answer, and setting up and admin, and how that varied across the different levels of student and the different years of study in these schools. Very interesting. But we also used it, that was in 1988, we published that. And then just 30 years again later, we were looking at data from a dental practice and looking at the percentage of time spent on looking at or doing complicated dental treatments, or just doing checkups or missed appointments, and looking how that varied over time, just to get a pattern of change that the practice was undergoing. So it's really interesting to use the methods in different contexts, I think. And a further reason for publishing is that it means that you can get evidence for something like an impact case study. And anyone in a university is probably required to get involved in impact case studies as part of the research excellence framework. And if you have something published, then you can actually use that as evidence in an impact case study. So the successes can be used not only for the company or for the research project you're involved with, but also as evidence for an impact case study. I'll talk more about KTPs, the knowledge transfer partnerships, in a minute. I had the great fun of writing or being involved in 3 books here. The first one on the left there was actually I co-edited with Tony Greenfield, and this was a summary of the work that was carried out as part of the Pro-MBIS project, so that's statistical practice in business and industry. And then one of my MBIS colleagues, Andrea Almayer-Stubbe, she and I wrote a couple of books on data mining and monetizing data, and that was great fun. And we used the experience of all the different projects that we've done, applying statistics in different industries to give background to those books. And similarly, there was another book that we've been looking at, cancer engineering. But being involved in all these different things means that you meet lots of different people, and there are opportunities for outputs in different ways. I think one of the things that's been really pleasant, just last year, I was asked to put on some talks by stats graduates who are working outside academia, just to show the final year students really what sort of work they could do. And having all these networking contacts means that I had access to people who very kindly came and gave talks. So people, I had one a week for several weeks, people who are now working in finance and pharma and so on. And that was a great pleasure to be able to provide that. And the speakers were happy to speak as well. I think that sums up the sort of networking aspect.
Thank you, Shirley. It's very interesting hearing that, and as someone who operates independently as a consultant, you know, networking is something that is close to my heart. So really interesting to hear your experience there. I'll just check, see if people want to post the question now, I'll read it out and you know, for Shirley to answer. We have a question, more of a comment from looking for volunteers to, it's okay, this is about the British Standard Institute. I think we'll leave that one to the end. BSI, someone work you've been involved in yourself, Shirley?
Um, yes, on and off. Not, I haven't been part of their committees, but I do know about it, and I've helped with various things. Yeah.
Yeah, but coming back to what you did, the one question I do have is about the local networks. You talked about local industrial forums and that. Do you have advice on how to sort of sort the wheat from the chaff? Because I know from going to a lot of those networks, some are worthwhile and some aren't. What's your experience on that?
I've I've found the ones I've been to have all been good, actually. I mean, you don't need to stay long if it's not very good. I only go to the ones that are local. So the ones that are my university is right in the middle of the city, Newcastle, and so quite often things are put on in the city, and I would go along and see how good they are. And if they're not very good, I wouldn't stay very long. Um,
Mm.
so I don't think I've found that problem. I've always found them quite quite interesting. Maybe I'm easily interested.
Yeah, it surprised me actually with my own experience of networking, just what connections and opportunities you can make. The other question I will ask is about you talked about method being reused in different sectors and different parts there. In your experience, do you find that, if I could use the term, some sectors can be quite blinkered in terms of what they could be using and just lack that awareness of what is happening elsewhere? Is that your experience?
Yes, definitely. I think that's a really important point. I mean, and I have found that's fascinating actually using um, same technique in different areas. And you're absolutely right. People are blinkered, and one of the problems is they have their own nomenclature, their own notation.
Yes.
And for example, A/B testing. Um, a lot of people in marketing say, "Oh, yes, we like that," but actually, it's very much based on designed experiments. And yet they wouldn't normally think of that. They wouldn't see that connection. And similarly with conjoint analysis in marketing, again, that's got a very big foundation of designed experiments. And the industrial people got very keen on Taguchi and said they were doing Taguchi experiments. And they might say, "Oh, we're not interested in designing experiments, we want Taguchi experiments," whereas in fact, they're all based on the same sort of concept. And so I think there's a lot of explaining that needs to be done, and it takes some doing to adapt and to adopt the nomenclature of a different industry when you're talking to them. But you have to do it. And the marketing one in particular, they have their own terminology. Instead of factor effects, they talk about they use utilities and things. You know, they have different words for it, and so you have to use that. But I definitely think I think there's a lot of scope actually by opening things up and for us as statisticians to perceive the similarity between things so that we can help out across the different fields.
Yeah, I've got to completely agree. And the way I like to express it, based on my experience of working across different sectors, you end up being an interpreter. You know,
Yes.
it's you find out 7 different words for the same concept, you know, and you sort of learn to interpret. Okay, I think we'll move on then to your next part, please.
Okay. I just wanted to give some applications really, but just to give a brief rundown of the background. I mean, most of my recent, the applications have come from working at ISRU, and that was set up, a unit set up by Professor Barry Wetherill in about 1990 as part of the School of Maths and Statistics at Newcastle. And he did a lot of statistical process control and designed experiments in ICI in particular. And that's when I first got involved. We then moved on to renaming, if you like, a lot of our stuff as Taguchi. And then we got involved in Six Sigma, which I really like, the concept of thinking of statistical projects, not just as a mathematical situation, but as a sort of management initiative. So Six Sigma is based on these different phases: the define phase, the measure phase, analysis phase, improve, control, and then transferring of the ideas to other areas in a business. And I've always added a further one, which is E, which is the evaluation. using the Six Sigma approach means that your analysis is actually about the right thing, and you don't waste a lot of time by pursuing the wrong topic or the wrong problem. You make sure you know what the problem is. You make sure that all your data is available first. All the people that need to be involved are committed, and that you've looked around at everything that's available already, and that you actually make some improvement. You actually hold the gains of your improvement, and you actually look to see where your improvement that you've carried out can be used elsewhere. So that was a big area of interest for us at Six Sigma, and Dave Stewart's got us a lot of funding to work with local companies to help them with their Six Sigma work. Then we started getting a lot of European contracts. For example, the ProEmbus one, which I've already mentioned, but there are others. We moved on to data mining in the service sector and utilities and healthcare. And then I got very interested in small to medium enterprises, SMEs, and looking at their big data analytics, because they were missing out quite often because they weren't so up on analysing data as the bigger companies, and yet they needed to be if they wanted to compete. And we had quite a lot of European social funds and regional development funds to help SMEs to make use of big data analytics. Again, that's almost like a renaming of statistics, and that's the nomenclature that we used. And this moved on, I suppose, to the KTPs, the knowledge transfer partnerships, which led to a lot of interventions by us in different businesses and to case studies. And I was lucky to have an impact case study in the two most recent refs, which was very good for me. So just some examples. So that's the sort of background, if you like, but statistics is so broad, it's difficult to pick out some. So I've just picked out a few little things here. Statistics and pipeline research. My first involvement at British Gas was with the pipeline inspection gauge, the so-called PIG. And these PIGs are this really complicated bit of machinery here, which is passed down the massive transmission pipes that the gas is passed through from one end of the country to the other. And the PIG goes through the pipe and sends out signals. It could be elastic wave, or it could be some other mechanism. It's changed over the years, and the readings come back and tell you what the integrity of the pipeline wall is. So you're looking for defects, corrosion or holes in the pipe from this internal inspection gauge. And British Gas had a centre called the Online Inspection Centre, which is where I worked, and where a little bit before and at an earlier stage in his career, Nigel also worked. So this was I was very much involved in computer programming at the time, actually, as a senior engineer, but also with statistical analysis of the signals that came back using cluster analysis and so on to identify defects of different types so that they could be located. So this is a big area, terribly expensive, and all the transmission pipes are checked by these PIGs ongoing all the time. However, there are also pipes used in water, and this is a slightly different scenario. Obviously, gas is has to be looked after. It's well embedded under the ground, and so it has the internal measure, but water pipes are very often on the surface. And this small company in the area, engineering company, developed a tool that could measure could look for defects in pipes by running along the outside of the pipe. And again, this is an example of where the data is precious, because here's a picture of the people. They've dug out the pipe and they've put this tool onto the pipe. The pipe runs up and down the length of the pipe in sampling it, and goes right the way around it, 360 degrees. But you can see all the nice mud and puddles that you have to wade through to get the data. So this tool is an alternative to the PIG, if you like. It's a tool developed by the small to medium enterprise, passes along the outside of the pipe and captures signals. And there's clearly lots of opportunities for statistical analysis here. Previously, we used to use principal components analysis to combine the signals from the 360 degrees and use regression with various factors to do with the soil type and the age of the pipe and so on. But the company was aware that a competitor in a different country was using a Gaussian process approach. And so they asked us if we could use that approach and see how it compared with our original approach. And so this made a very nice project, which a postgraduate did as part of their a breakout from their PhD. And they also had several other projects going on looking at this sort of analysis. So this was a really good example of where you can use practical methods in a practical application. Second example I wanted to mention was asset management, because I've been looking at this quite recently. We had a accelerated knowledge transfer partnership that was just a short project of about 4 months, where we're helping a company work out how to market and how to present their office spaces. With people working flexibly and working from home, people like to rent office spaces for temporary purposes. But they need offices of different sizes, so they need to have flexibility. And deciding to what extent the rooms need to be flexible and what sort of rooms are needed, what facilities are needed, that we can make use of all the data from observation and analyse that to make some predictions for the company. The first thing that we did, as we do with any of these sort of projects, is to have a look at the data that there is. And this corresponds to the sort of Six Sigma approach, where we're defining the project and looking at the measurements. And this typically takes about half of the project, usually, because actually getting the company to be able to put all the data in your hands in one place and for you to actually combine it into a database for analysis takes a lot of effort. So here we have lots of different companies. Typically, they had about 600 companies actually using their office space. They have a number of different size of room, which are listed in that table there. And these companies use them at different times of the year. And we can give a feedback to the company, not only how much time they've spent in different types of rooms at different times of year, but also how much they've paid. And we can use this to sort of predict the requirements. We can predict it for the company involved, advising them what they need to budget for the next year. But we can also feed it back to the office owner, the asset manager, asset owner, and advise them as to how they can arrange their office space. So the benefits to the company in this little project, they reckon that they can increase the usage of their office space by 40% by providing flexibility to customers. And we can do just a pen and pencil assessment of the worth of this sort of work by just gathering some basic information. So open data shows that office rents were about £50 per square foot in Leeds. We know how many square feet of office space the company have. They've estimated, they reckon that they can improve it by 40%, and this is justified by the data analysis we've done, which suggests that they can increase their revenue by over £500,000. So this is the final stage, if you like, of a Six Sigma project where you evaluate the gains. And quite often you think it's impossible because how do we know how much the value is? But we can always put an estimate on things, and that's what we've done here. And so you can actually give some figures. As a third case study, I wanted to just mention, it's a bit of a cheat really, but the versatility of statistics, because there's so many different ways that stats can be used. And I just mentioned 3 here. So I've had great pleasure in working with cable manufacturers in quite a few different occasions and looking at the lots of data to do with the cables, the integrity of the cables and their longevity and so on. I've also had great fun looking at data from a pressure sensing microbore tool, which I'll show a picture of in a minute, and also been involved in designed experiments of cyclic oxidation testing in metals. So three completely diverse, different concepts here. I just wanted to give you pictures from briefly. So the cable data, the company has to be able to confirm the quality of their cables, and so they do destructive testing. Clearly very expensive, so you don't get that many data points, but they're very keen on sort of modeling the data, and here we've got some sort of viable models of the data, and showing that their cables are within spec, which is fortunate. Totally different concept here. This is telegraph poles. When you have wooden telegraph poles, how do you decide if they're in good condition or not, and whether they need to be replaced? And this small company, small to medium enterprise, has developed a tool that pierces through the telegraph pole through the diameter when it's still in position, and gives a feedback as to the resistance, the residual strength of the wood. And that's what the graph at the top there is. Where it's green, it shows there's good resistance from the wood, and it's the integrity is good. Where it's red and yellow, it shows that it's weakened. So in this particular pole, you can see it identifies where there's a weakness in the pole, but then they asked us to do some mathematics to work out what the remaining braking load was of the pole, and to see whether it comes up to a required level of safety, factor of safety. And so we did a big spreadsheet of this and lots of moments of inertia and so on, and came up with some solutions which recommended when a pole needed to be replaced and when it didn't. And the advantage of this, of course, is that instead of a company having to replace all their poles, they can then prioritise and just replace the ones that are definitely showing signs of weakness. And so again, you can evaluate the benefit here. So for example, a company might have 3,000 of these telegraph poles. Again, they're out in the country, and you can see the man with his boots on there has to go and walk from one to the other, a lot of effort to get the data. But if you can show that, say, 25% actually are okay and don't need replacing, then that's a potential savings of £1.5 million, which is a lot. So it just shows that these businesses, this is how they make their living. They show the benefit to a company of using their instrumentation, but they need to have the presentation and the statistical analysis to present it. Finally, this is the cyclic oxidation testing. European projects are fantastic fun. You work with partners in different European universities and businesses. This one was to do with metals, and it was centered in Germany. So a lot of different steel manufacturers and all working together, working out how to evaluate the effects of cyclic oxidation. That is where you have a metal filament that's alternating between high temperature and low temperature. So such like when a light is switched on and off, and how quickly that's going to make the metal decline. There, each of the experiments is very expensive because you're looking at a lot of cycles of hot and cold in different environments, and you're looking at different metals, and you're looking at different laboratories in different countries, and the readings that you're getting out are a profile showing how the metal at first oxidizes and increases in weight, and then it starts to spool, as they call it, where bits drop off it. And they're looking to see how long it takes to spool, time to spool for the different types of metal undergoing different cyclic oxidation. And it's interesting that they had statistics as a very small part of this, whereas in fact it's a very key part, because deciding on the experimental regime is very statistical. And in fact, it was very interesting and quite complicated working out what levels to test everything at. And we had a very good project. It took 3 years to come up with these sort of experiments, and you can see that the main effects, the upper temperature, and the higher the upper temperature, probably as you'd expect, means that it time to spoil is much quicker. But if you're in the upper temperature for a bit longer, then that's useful, because it's the flickering in high and low that causes the most damage, if you like, or speeds up the spalling. Very interesting. But again, an interesting application of statistics, and something that Dave Stewartson, our director, perceived as a possibility, and actually contacted the consortium who were doing the cyclic oxidation testing and said, you ought to have a statistician and we should be part of this project. And they agreed, and we were part of it. So it's an interesting example of how really statisticians need to be sort of quite assertive and think of ways that they can be they can add value. And I think that's those case studies.
Yeah. So, we've lost your slide, Shirley. I don't know what's happened at your end. If you could just, whilst you're working, put the slide back up. Again, people would like to ask a question at this point. If you could just post it in the chat box, please, and I will read it out. But, so I don't know what, it's just at the end there, the last minute or so, we just lost your slide, so I don't know if there's something.
Oh, which one's from?
Oh, it's everything. We are now just seeing a team screen. We're not, so it's like your slideshow has stopped. So we're no longer seeing your slideshow. I'd suggest you just pause the slideshow and then restart it.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Question I will ask here at this point, and I'll just start with our mutual experience working at British Gas back in the 80s, the pipeline inspection operations there. And I just reflecting on my experience there, my question would you regard that as an early example of big data? And the reason I asked that, because I think you said you did some computer programming there and then some cluster analysis of the signals. And it was my understanding when British Gas started that, they were mostly inspecting their own pipelines, which were in good condition. And so therefore, they could just print out the signals on a long sheet of paper and manually examine that to see if there were any issues. But then I think it was in 1983, they did one of their first inspections of a pipeline outside the UK, and it was in terrible condition. They got completely overloaded. And so I'm wondering the need where you came in, which I think was around that time, the need to pre-process that signal and sort of almost to manage that volume of data. Is that a fair way of characterizing the work you were doing back then?
Yes, yeah, there was a lot of calibration actually, and a lot of identifying areas of interest, because you're right, there was a lot of a whole mass of data. So we did have to identify areas, and they used to call them they had a name for them, I think, this sort of areas of interest that were identified. So you're right, there was a two-stage process, I guess, actually, of calibrating and extracting the suitable data and then looking at it. But yes, so you're right, it started with a lot of these things. When it goes into practice, the environment's quite different, isn't it? So that's probably why they moved on to different types of instrumentation, actually, in different methods, because they were always looking for different ways of measuring things that were easier to tune and to identify the signal from the noise. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah,
I think
I certainly remember that. We have a question here from Martin. Any experiences of Hadamard matrices? So I don't know which context, which subject that would be, which
DOE. Designed experiments.
Yes. Well, you mean applying them to companies? I think it depends when you're working with businesses. One of the problems that I'm sure you're aware of is if you make anything too complicated, they don't like it. So we tended to stick with very simple designs, actually, because a lot of the work we were doing was in the what they call the low-hanging fruit area, so that you're in a position to identify very quickly gross effects that make a big difference. I think if you're in an area where you've moved on and you're looking at very good data and you're looking for very small influences, then it's important to use more complicated designs. So I have veered away. I mean, we just used factorial experiments and composite central composites and that sort of thing, because really most of the work, or most of the improvements, because we're focused on improvement in companies, and most of the improvement comes from them actually knowing what they're measuring and what they should measure and getting the data in a suitable format. Adding complication by making better designs isn't always needed. I mean, in the pharmaceutical area, then that is definitely important. But I think in manufacturing, the whole lot is so noisy, if you like, that we haven't done anything too complicated. So no, I haven't applied them.
The reason why I asked was you mentioned, I mean, I'm with you. I'd keep it simple because there's so much can be found because of the ignorance and of the engineers particularly. But you mentioned Taguchi, and everybody got on the Taguchi bandwagon. But when I was doing some desktop research years ago, I found that Fisher, of course, in the 20s and 30s, but Hadamard matrices seems to predate all of that from the late 19th century, and yet it wasn't really picked up on. And so I always, if I'd stayed in academia, I would like to have had a student, a postgrad, do something about it. Because it's fascinating, because as I remember, you can quote the type, the alpha error and the beta error that you're looking for and the improvement you're looking for, and then it'll to develop what size DOE you need. Well, of course, makes it more complicated. But I've never found anybody who's used Hadamard matrices. That's why I was asking the question. That's
brilliant, actually. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that we would offer as a short project. If we could find a suitable application, that would be a really good one. But I haven't done that one yet. Maybe when the opportunity arises, I will do, and I'll quote you on it. You're right about the agreeing with me as regards the noise. I remember Dave Stewartson used to say that there was a bottomless pit of need in the world for statistics, and I always thought that was rather apposite.
Yeah, it's funny. I've just been. Oh, actually, no. I'll be quiet because I can talk too much. So I'll go back to mute. Mute.
Thank you, Martin. We will have time for more questions later on. Shirley, we're still not seeing your slide. Are you able to get that back up?
Right, let's have a look and see what I can do. What can we do?
I would suggest you stop the slideshow and
yes, I have.
Stop sharing and then restart it.
Okay. I share.
Now we've got. I can see your PowerPoint now if you restart your slideshow.
Let's just see if that works. Sorry about that. Where should I go from?
We're back. Yes.
Where should I go from, do you think?
Move on to the the Q&A slide where we should have keep going forward.
Did you see the dashboard?
Yes, I can see it. Yes. So.
Did you see it before or not?
No, we did see it before, and we saw it keep going. It was halfway through that slide there when it stopped working.
Okay, well, that was the last of those slides.
Yes, that's right. So that's why I didn't interrupt you at that point. I knew you were coming up to this slide. Okay, I'll hand back to you now to the next section.
Okay, so routes into practice, I thought this was a third aspect that would be useful to look at. Engagement routes, and following on from what the last question there, summer projects. I've been lucky working at a university where we can offer summer projects to undergraduates, and for them to have 6 weeks of experience of doing some kind of project. And I'm not sure about the Hadamard matrices, it might be a little bit complicated, but it could be okay. But any sort of data analysis that is fairly straightforward, we can offer to these students. So, for example, just looking at a correlation between weather and hay yields, for example, they would be quite happy doing that. And that's a useful way of getting started on a project, because quite often they come up with nice results which you can show to a farmer or some kind of agricultural place, for example, and then they might be interested in doing a further project. So that's a sort of at the easier level, if you like. It doesn't matter too much. It's just a bit of playing around with data. More serious would be a student BSc or MSc dissertation project, and companies are quite happy for students to look at sanitized versions of their data and do some analysis or make some methodological sort of predictions, try things out. These have to be handled a little bit more carefully, because the student has to have enough meat to be able to show that they've done something useful. But for example, the asset management, we've had several master's projects where students were looking at the office space and doing various analysis. For example, looking at the space required by different types of company, and doing some kind of clustering, if you like, of companies, or clustering of space. So that's a good engagement route. Then the next level up, if you like, is short, like 3-month projects for PhD students. And surprisingly, perhaps, a lot of PhD students seem to be happy to take 3 months out of their studies, usually in their final year or their second year, and do something completely different that is related, to statistics, but if you like, as a sort of alternative, but also to show them what it's like to work in industry and business. And so that forms a very good engagement route. Companies are very pleased, of course, to have a PhD student do something like that, apply their brains to an interesting problem. And this is a good also as a supervisor, because it doesn't matter too much about the brilliance of the project, if you like, because it's more the experience that the student's having. So we don't need to make sure that there's going to be something really solid for the student to do, because quite often just being involved in the company and observing how business works is enough for the PhD student. So those 3 types of projects are good, and we can offer them to a company that comes to us and says, can you, we'd like to do some statistics, can you advise us? And we would offer them those 3 different projects, different types of intervention. There's also the knowledge transfer partnership, which is a much better way of going forward, and I'm going to explain about them in a minute. And there are other ways, of course, of engagement. But the knowledge transfer partnerships I rather like. I've done a lot of these. They're substantial projects lasting for between 1 and 3 years. I usually do them for 2 years. They're funded by Innovate UK partially. So the company only pays part of the costs. And therefore a graduate, so someone who's finished a BSc, MSc or PhD, they work full-time for the company. And they're allowed 10% of time for continuing professional development. So it's a really good deal for the student, a really good deal for the company because they're subsidised, and it's a really good deal for the academic supervisor because it's extremely interesting. And also we have university support. So the 4 beneficiaries of a KTP are that the academic gets interesting exposure to a problem, or they can pursue. I mean, if I was particularly interested in Hadamard matrices, for example, I could make sure that was explored, and together we would perhaps get somewhere and be able to publish something on it and make use of it and do something useful. We can also use the experience in our teaching. The research associate gets a lot of value because they're working in a company. Quite often they're invited by the company to stay on or to apply for a post that applies, so they've got a job thereafter. The business and industry benefits are that they can see a student, a worker in action, and it's a good way of recruiting. They can decide if they like this person or not. Usually they do, and then they could encourage them to apply for a job. It improves their profits, and the KTP has an academic supervisor and an industrial supervisor, and that gives the industrial supervisor experience of something slightly different from their usual work. And the fourth beneficiary is the funder. So UK, they call it UK Limited or whatever, makes a profit because they can prove that for every £1 invested, there's a multiplier of benefit to the UK economy. So we have 4 beneficiaries to a KTP, and this is one of the things that I've been doing as a employee at Newcastle University. So I just want to quickly give you some examples of these. And I must have done about 15 of them, I think, but I'm just going to show you 3 of them. One of them, social housing. There are such things as social housing owners who might own tens of thousands of social housing that's rented out to people. It's highly regulated, and they clearly have masses of information about the rents, the type of tenants, the rent that's paid, when it's paid, any maintenance that's needed on the building, when the tenancy changes, how many people are in the house, and so on. This data can be analysed. It's used operationally just to help the company control the rental market, but also we can use it to predict arrears and help them identify people who are getting into trouble and help them to pay their rent. We can predict repairs, we can look at empty properties, voids, see what kind of tenancies lead to empty properties and so on. So masses of different things that you can do, as you can imagine, with loads and loads of data. And we had a 2-year project looking at machine learning of this sort of data. And one of the nice results that the research associate did, which was Farida Mustafazadeh. She published this and did a master's, an MPhil related to the work. She showed that there was different clusters of profiles of people, how they pay their rents. So you have some people that pay their rent regularly, some that get into debts in a sliding scale, and some people who are always behind. And if they could adjust the date that they paid their rent compared with when they got their social security payments, then you could cure some of the problems of indebtedness. And she did some really good work showing all sorts of outcomes of this. The benefits to the company for this particular 2-year project were the, first of all, development of intellectual property, creating 2 new jobs, and the support of a new flagship offering, which was their income analytics that they marketed, and it improved the company. So the company we were working for was a data information system that dealt with data coming from the property management people. Again, you can see that it takes a little bit of time to get your head around what is actually going on and what the data is, and getting the data into suitable form and finding out what the problem areas are, and then deciding how statistics can help. So second example, automotive sector. Here we worked with a small company called Rain Data that has access to all the masses of data that is produced every time a person goes into somewhere like Halfords and looks up what kind of brake pads or windscreen wipers or exhaust pipe is needed for their particular car. And the person puts in their make and model of the car and the registration, and is thereby giving a massive data about the age of the car and the need of the car. And this data, it was amazing that there's millions and millions of cases coming in, raining in. That's why I called it rain data, raining in all the time. And this company had access to the real-time data and wanted to see what could be derived from it. And one of the results was looking at the probability of needing, I think this is brake disc replacement of different cars, because we have so many millions of cases. You can actually just observe, make some observations as to how different cars perform. So I've called these 3 different makes of car. I can't say what the makes of cars are because it's commercially sensitive, really. But you can see that the car, small car C, the green line there, the probability of needing a brake disc replacement is much lower at 50,000 miles than it is for small car A. In other words, you might be better off buying the green car because you're less likely to have to change the brake pads or earlier. Lots and lots of different bits of analysis, and this was a 2-year project that the company were very pleased with. They had an annual increase in sales turnover of £60,000, which they were pleased with. Created 2 new jobs. In fact, their data science section of this small company has increased, and they're very pleased with the results of the 2-year project. I found it really interesting, and the student did, and was actually kept on by the company, has been working for the company for the last few years, still there. And finally, the marine sector, totally different sector. This is a company that makes services marine engines. They've actually had 3 knowledge transfer partnerships. I wasn't involved in the first one, which was where they developed a new technology called an engine eye. I was involved in the second one and the third one. So the second one was to use the statistical and data mining techniques to enhance the engine eye monitoring system. So the engine eye instrumentation is very expensive, you know, tens of thousands of pounds, which is attached to the engines of a big ship and feeds back the fuel consumption second by second. And there's lots of things that can be done with that data. We can match it against the speed of the ship and the tide and the weather and the loading and so on, and we can do lots of interesting analysis, which is what we did. And then the third project there was looking at marketing that facility. So first of all, looking at the second one here, reducing fuel consumption, one of the companies that use this engine eye system is CalMac, and we had the opportunity to analyse the data of the fuel consumption doing daily trips between Scotland there and the Outer Hebrides, and looking at how the weather affects the fuel consumption and whether the tide affects the fuel consumption, so that you can decide whether it's to what extent you should vary your route and so on. And that's one aspect of the fuel consumption, but another aspect is monitoring and deciding when there's a change in fuel consumption pattern, which would imply that the engines are out of condition and need to be serviced. So there's an element of reliability and maintenance that can be observed from the fuel consumption. So we spent a couple of years looking at this data, lots and lots of data, and very interesting. And the research associate presented several conference papers and academic papers, and has also finished a PhD on this subject. So it's been really useful for that student. And the third one is to do with digital marketing of this engine eye and this new facility to be able to analyse the fuel consumption. But here we were looking at using A/B testing to improve the impact of their social media posts. And I've just included this because it's an example of a very simple and designed experiment. You've got 4 factors there, how long the social media post is, which day it was posted on, whether it mentions original equipment manufacturer or not, and whether it's specific or general. And we can look at the take-up. So we're reading the reactions and the clicks, I think, over over time after the post has been looked at. And this is extremely interesting. Lots of data. We were deciding where to take the measurement, because you have a sort of profile of reactions over the several days after the post has been made, and then looking to see whether there's any effect of the different factors, whether you can make use of the fact of the different days or content. And what's interesting, I think, is that we did get results. So we did show that there was an effect of a combination of, let me just see, the content and the length. But it's also interesting that the day that the thing is posted has a slight implication as to what kind of person is going to read the post, whether it's a manager or one of the engineers. And so you can derive quite a lot of interesting information from looking at how the posts are received. Oops. A lot of benefits were perceived from these different projects altogether. So the 3 projects overall, the annual sales increase of £4 million, 5 new jobs, and a 3-year collaboration with Innovate UK. So the small to medium enterprise, Royston Marine, benefited a lot from having these 3 interventions, all based, the last 2 particularly, all based on statistics. I think this is the last thing I wanted to mention, just the Knowledge Exchange Hub for Mathematical Sciences. The KE Hub, I'm actually part of as a super champion. I was invited to be one of their champions. This is, it's originally funded by the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge, but now has an EPSRC grant for the next 4 years. And it's a hub where we have businesses who are interested in making use of statistics and mathematics, at least 60. In fact, it's 73 when I counted them. We have knowledge exchange champions in over 50 universities. That's 1 for each of the maths departments, virtually, of the UK universities. We have 40 professionals. That's the sort of knowledge exchange professionals in universities, 8 super champions. And this hub is a way of bringing people together, people who want to make use of maths and statistics in their business, and people who want to be involved in applying the maths and stats. My particular role of the 8 is in short projects. And the reason for this coming along was that it was identified that there weren't enough maths and stats projects going along. And so the KE Hub acts as a broker to put people together. And there's bursaries available for industry partners. But this is restricted to 3rd or 4th year PhD students, actually. So these are 3-month projects that are related to or suitable for 3rd or 4th year students. Okay, so that's something that I'm very much involved with at this moment. What makes companies engage? Well, sometimes they just have an idea themselves. They like the Gaussian process. They just fancy looking at a different way of doing something. Or it could be that the competitor has put it in their mind that there's something new that needs to be done. Sometimes the entrepreneurs or the owners of the business or the managers may have been to a talk or a seminar where they hear an idea. For example, with the Royston people, they'd heard about whether tide and weather had to what extent that affected fuel consumption, and whether that interacted with deciding if an engine needed reconditioning and so on. And they wanted to pursue that. Or they may be inspired by a conversation. The man with the telegraph poles was inspired just by a chat that we had in a pub one time. Some companies feel that it's their corporate social responsibility to do something, that they ought to make use of the facilities available, mainly the funding, to actually improve their business. Or they may just think that it's a bargain, that they might as well have someone else come along, and that encourages them to engage. I've found that companies are pretty keen to engage. They don't like to spend much money, but they will if they can see that it's going to be beneficial. Don't want to end on a bad note, but there are some lessons that I've learned from poor engagement. There can be a mismatch of personality types between academics and managers, and that can be, we do look at things slightly different ways, and the academics have to adjust really, and realise that the managers have really got to get their bottom line sorted out and all this sort of thing. A major problem is where there's a change in management and company focus, and this happens a lot in businesses. They have a reorganization and that changes things, and the person who was particularly interested moves on, or the student can get distracted or just run out of time or get put onto something that is not very interesting and not really the project as it was outlined, and that can be a problem. And clearly there's lots of others, I'm sure, that anyone who's done consulting would know about. And I think that's all I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Shirley. So what we'll do now, we'll take a couple of questions on this particular section of knowledge transfer and helping employers to actually adopt what they've been working on. Then Shirley will do a short conclusion, and then we'll move into the general Q&A. So again, please put in the chat box any questions you may have on this topic to begin with. So one question that I would like to mention is, and you briefly referred to it in the Orchard case study, and that's around IP. Now, this is something I've always felt, I don't know, a bit funny about when it comes to statistics, because I don't see statistics as something that it naturally could be turned into intellectual property. Would you mind talking a little bit your experience of use of IP? Is it primarily around the computer programming code, or is it about statistical method? When IP comes up, what are they actually referring to?
Well, that's a good point, actually. It's a trick, can be a tricky area, and it could be very difficult. If you had written a full computer package, then it's very important who the intellectual property, who owns that package. Fortunately, I haven't really had that problem. When we write up a knowledge transfer partnership contract, intellectual property is included in that, and there's sometimes a bit of a tussle. The company want to keep any of the results that there are, and I think usually in our statistics we're just happy with that, because we're usually just applying methods to their data. And so in the Orchard case, it was more, I suppose, the concepts and the ideas and the suggestions of how to do things and what could be done. And it would be quite difficult to claim to own that, I think. And so we just have to let them make use of it as they wish. If you were writing a package for it, I don't think, in my experience, we wouldn't normally be doing that, actually, because we're more putting the ideas out there and making suggestions and trying it in a sort of trying out phase, as opposed to producing a perfect package. It is tricky, though. For my PhD, I had this problem, actually, because I developed a big package of analysing three-dimensional reconstruction serial sections, and I ended up with a package which was mine, and a few people wanted to make use of this, and I had the dilemma of whether to let them, with all the risk of them not using it properly or changing it and commercially advancing it, or whether to say that they couldn't have it. and I decided not to not to share it. So
Yeah.
I think I'm not very up on intellectual property in a way. Usually I try to veer clear of it, or to let the company keep the intellectual property is, I think, the best thing myself. But I think with statistics so far, the sort of work I've done, unless, I suppose, you see, for an academic, if you produced a methodology which was innovative and unusual, which could happen, then you would publish that in a paper. The company would feel duty bound to let you do that, and then you've established some currency from it, which would be useful intellectual property and probably all that you need for your work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I don't think it would be that easy to sell on, but it's a good point.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in your experience, actually, Nigel. Have you had this on?
Well, I mean, the only example I can think of is Zoopla, where they have a. If anybody goes searching for houses, looking to buy a house, just like what I'm trying to do at the moment, and you're quite often these days, some of them might give an estimate, okay, of how much you're going to pay, how much you can expect price. Well, I do remember back in the noughties, about 15 years ago, I developed a model for predicting house prices for one of my clients, who then sold out to Zoopla. And so there was an issue around the methodology that I was using, who actually owned that methodology. And I think I largely worked on the basis that it wasn't anything innovative about the methodology. It was fairly standard. It was publicly available data. It was standard statistical method. So it's I just basically said, well, provided I can reuse it, it's it was, I struggled to see where the IP was, but it was something that had to be talked about.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do now, we'll go to your conclusions, and then we'll open up to the general Q&A.
Okay, so I just wanted to a small conclusions here is the magnificence really of statistics and data. I think what I've observed over the years is that statistics is important in all types of industry and business. There's hardly any areas where it's not important. I think I've had the opportunity to go into many of the companies and industries in my area and other areas of geographical area, and there's always been some sort of application that I can see to what they could do with their data or how they could use statistics. So I think it's a pity that it's not used more, really, but certainly people are waking up to what's available and what can be done. And so there's no area that isn't open to a bit of statistical analysis. I think statistics is incredibly versatile from all the different methodologies. So I think whatever the application, whatever the area of research, there's always some application. And I think that's important if people are wanting to get involved in like European projects. Virtually you could ask to tap into anything, actually, because there's always a little bit of statistics that could be applied. And that's another thing that I think we sometimes do at the university, visit people in other schools and other faculties and talk to them about the projects they're putting in funding for, and encourage them to add in a little bit of funding for the statistical aspects of it. And quite a lot of them do that and find it very beneficial. And I think the final thing is it's fascinating how over the years, from being a sort of rather unusual area, more and more people are now finding data fascinating. I remember if you look at airports, for example, they're talking about analysing data and doing data analytics on billboards. And I remember one of the first adverts that fascinated me, I think it was Dacia Cars. It said, "Do the maths." And it was not so long ago that the very talking about maths was forbidden, if you like, and people on the radio used to say, "Oh, I can ask me to memorize the whole of Hamlet, and I will, but ask me to add 2 and 2, and I go to pieces." And they used to be proud of that sort of thing, and so think, want people to think how clever they were. But now, no one would dream of doing that. So there's a complete sea change. People have got a terrific respect now for maths and data, and I think that's brilliant. They find it fascinating and challenging, and also enjoyable. So the status of our subject has improved enormously over the years, and that's very gratifying. So I think that's my conclusion about the magnificence, if you like, of stats.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to conclude there. Thank you very much, Shirley. And you've just given me a prompt for the first question, which I will ask. But I'll just say to everybody now, this is now the general Q&A session. So if people want to turn their microphones on, and cameras on, by all means do so to ask the question. But I'm going to claim the first question and to pick up really on what Shirley had said right at the end. And my question is this: your career is covering 40 years, isn't it? Would you say your career is now 40 years?
I suppose so, yes, that's right. Yeah.
So if you were to look back over the entirety of that career, and I want to ask you to come up with 2 things here. What had changed out of all recognition? And you've just hinted at one thing there, but also the complete opposite. And this is the application of statistics and statistical method, though specifically in that respect. What had changed out of all recognition? But at the other end, what had not changed at all? And perhaps maybe even gone into reverse. So very big, broad, open question.
Yeah. No, I think the status of statistics and data has changed out of all recognition. I think from being rather a sort of niche area, it's now claimed by everyone, and that can have some bad effects, of course, because it's almost closing up again, I think, with too much automation and too much AI and too much machine learning type stuff without thought. So that's been almost parabolic, I should say, and keeping a claim on the area so that statistics is still important is something that is quite an important role for statisticians, actually, not to let it get out of hand and not to let the subtleties of the subject get submerged in the sort of analysis of vast quantities of data and getting results rather than getting information, explaining, using the data to explain things rather than just to predict. So there's been a bit of a change in the way people view this sort of work. What hasn't changed? Well, I still think if you explain something carefully to people, they still get confused. They still don't like. There's something about maths that people don't like. I was talking to a 14-year-old girl a few days ago, and she said she's really good at English, and she's really good at other subjects, but maths, she just gets really confused. She said it's those 2x equals 10 type things. What's the x? There's something about x's that people just don't like. It just doesn't come naturally somehow. Being so specific and rigid, and identifying a signal from noise, people don't seem to like very much. They prefer to have a sort of overview of things rather than pin down on stuff. So I think it's still as hard to teach maths as it always was, actually. Always will be.
Anybody else? I'd say please do turn your microphone and camera on if you ask a question on anything that Shirley had talked about today. The one question that I did want to ask earlier, which come back to me, is around the actual working with client, and you do a piece of work and it's effective, and the client can see the benefit. But have you ever gone back to sort of check in, say, like 5 years' time to see if they're still using it? And if they're not, how often can that sort of knowledge be lost? And why might it be lost?
I think if you go back 5 years, because it's such a fast-moving period, fast-moving subject, that they would have moved on a lot from it. So, for example, the rain data, that was a few years ago. I mean, probably 4 years ago. They will still definitely be using the stuff that we did, but they'll have built on it. So I don't think it's lost, but I think it's people, once they get going, they do build on it a lot. It's not, sometimes I suppose it's lost, not so often. But yeah, it does happen sometimes. I mean, I suppose it would be interesting to go back over lots of projects and just see which ones have continued it and which ones haven't. I mean, quite often thinking of the KTPs, they do start a data science sort of department with the KTP Research Associate heading it up. But sometimes it does get diverted into more of the mainstream work of the company until another need comes along or another bit of funding comes along. So that does happen. But I think once they've been made aware of these things, they do tend to adopt them. I mean, if you look at the process industries, they're very much technical and data aware, using simulations and so on, more than they did a long time ago. So yeah, I think I'm always assuming that they still use everything. Maybe that's a bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah.
What do you think? Have you found that, Nigel, as well, or not?
I think what we might be, our experience did differ is the scale of the work. It sounds like the kind of work you're doing engages more people within an organisation. And so therefore, even if, say, a manager changes or one of the employees leave, there is somebody else who still remembers, well, this is what we were doing, this is why we're doing. I think my experience as a consultant is that quite often I'm working with one or two people, and if they leave, there hasn't as yet been the transfer or the knowledge internally. It can be a bit of a problem, but quite often it is just one person who's interested, who's got the need. And so I think it's a question of scale, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That does happen. You get someone who's particularly keen, but it doesn't necessarily transfer across to other places. I mean, what can sometimes happen is the company sees the benefit of the work that's been done, but then they outsource it. They outsource to, instead of continuing with their own people, they just buy in a outside one, and that's not very satisfactory, because particularly in our area, the Northeast, we're trying to sort of develop expertise within the Northeast. So you don't want them employing some London contractor, to do the work. They're meant to be doing it themselves. I mean, that's where it's important for courses to be put on, actually, to help develop the skills after. So it would be good, actually, if they could come to a trainer like yourself or other people, or to the university, and do bespoke sort of refresher courses or whatever, or just to keep them at it and keep seeing what they could do. But that isn't the nature of the funding, is it? It finishes and that's it.
Yes, that can happen. Just checking to see if there's any other question that people want to ask here. Just to build on that point there, I think the thought that goes through my mind, and funny enough, I've just remembered that when I met Tony Greenfield first summer thing in Antwerp, this was actually the subject of my talk at that conference, which was the different routes that consultants could find themselves going into a client. And And I made a distinction between clients that already had an existing statistical capability of some kind. They might not necessarily call themselves statisticians, but they were definitely applying statistics in some way. And it was part of their day-to-day operation. And therefore, the need for the consultant was to add something more to what they were doing. So this would be where you might come in, versus another client that has identified the need for a statistical capability or a statistical model of some kind, but they don't have the internal capability. And so they're going out searching. And so most of my work as a consultant comes from that type of client. But they know they need somebody like me, but then they go out and search for. And I wonder if the people you're working for, what would be the split, say, between those that go out searching for people like you versus those that have an existing capability that they wish to build on?
Well, the building on the existing capability would be the most satisfactory, actually. But I think it's not, I should say it's about a third of the cases, and then 2/3 of the other ones where it's just something that they've heard about, they think would be quite useful to do something, but they don't want to spend the money on it. And if you're lucky, or if they're lucky, then they realise that it could be useful and they do spend the money after all. Otherwise, it could just finish when that finishes. But I think one shouldn't be too despondent, because I think it's a long haul. It's a long time span. It's a long-term thinking that we're looking at here. We're sort of building expertise over the long term. And even if people have a lull of a few years, they often come back to it.
Yeah.
I found that with people that I've met, and you talked about it with them and they say, oh, that's interesting. And then like 10 years later, it could be you actually do some work with them. Yeah. It's a long-term gain.
Yeah. Martin, do you have questions?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on Shirley's comments about, people still struggle with maths. And I was doing some training with a colleague. I won't say for who, because this has been recorded, but we were asked to do, they said on the training cohort, there was going to be about 6 people from HR and the rest, the 14 would be engineers. So could we put in some HR type applications? And we did that, and it was okay. But the HR professionals, I mean, almost to a person, they said, oh, I can't do maths. I can't do this. And I said, well, yes, you can, just open your mind. See what we see. We'll go through some case studies that we've picked up from the internet, and you can do it. But there is there's almost like barriers. We had our nephew with us for a couple of years, who came back from France and went to the local secondary school, and he wasn't very good at maths because his focus on, I want to play golf, which is fine. But there's still maths in all walks of life, but it's just trying to encourage young people to think differently. And I guess the other point I wanted to come out, when I talk about, Shirley said it earlier, about improvement. And I think there's something wrong, not only with British education, but also European, because when I think about quality, I think about quality improvement, process improvement. Everything can be improved. And I'm connected on LinkedIn through Bill Scherkenbach, who was the head of statistical methods office at Ford Motor Company in the 1980s when worked with Deming. And he said on the 15th of March, it's very short, I'll read it out. He said, given the state of quality in the world, I'm coming out of retirement. So he must be 80 something. And when he says quality, I'm sort of reading through the lines, it's quality improvement. But this is the key thing. He said, to be perfectly blunt, quality is made at the top of an organization. It's the quality of the decisions and the directions that are made at the top that dictate the prosperity of the organization. Shirley's talking about the prosperity, the ongoing prosperity from the projects and the companies you've been working with. But I think that takes a visionary leader to say, actually, we found a better way of doing something. We're going to stick with it. But as you also said earlier, if you do get a change of manager, senior manager, it can just kibosh the whole improvement methodologies you've put in place. In the end, that's about the people side of things, the variation in people. He also went on to say quality is also made up front in the design stage. Most do not spend enough time or knowledge up front and end up spending too much time, too much money down the road because of it. And I can empathise with that, again, from various companies I've worked with and been involved with. And it's almost like firefighting, trying to find the low-hanging fruit. But if they're really focused on getting the statisticians involved way up front in the design stage, thinking about what they were trying to do, then I think we'd be in a much better place. But sadly, it doesn't work like that. So, you know, but for Sherkin back to be coming out of retirement, I find quite interesting. I don't know what age he is. I'd like to find out, but there we are.
I think it's probably a mistake. I think he should just accept it and carry on with his retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think one should be too despondent. It's just an observation, isn't it? This is the way things are. And maybe, I suppose it's a carrot and a stick, isn't it? If people realise how useful it is to be able to think numerically, then they'll be encouraged to do something about it. Maybe, I don't know, the schools perhaps at the primary level, the way they're teaching is changing, so maybe that'll have a knock-on effect. You know, they do a lot of sort of measuring things and experimenting with things at primary level now, so maybe that'll have an effect.
I don't know. I've no experience. I can't comment. So
Dad, just ask you, Martin, about that experience when you had engineers and HR people. Did that actually turn out okay? The experience. It
did. Yeah. We had to modify some of our training examples to put it in an HR type application. But hopefully they got it. I mean, I think 4 of the 6 submitted a project. This was Greenbelt training, and they were good. They were all right. I think 2 moved on, left the company, didn't submit. So that's what happens, you know. But they seem to get it. But there is this, I don't know, there's something in the way they think, oh, I can't do maths. Well, yes, you can.
It's I like calling, this is just my way of viewing it, but I think statisticians failed the Ghostbusters test. We're a profession that failed that test. So if you remember the film Ghostbusters, brilliant film, obviously from the 80s, they had that line, that jingle or line, you know, something goes bumping in the night. Who do you call? And it's Ghostbusters. And it's that, who do you call? So if I've got a tax problem, who do I call? Well, I'm a tax accountant, you know. If I've got something wrong with my plumbing, who do I call? A plumber. If I've got a legal issue, I'll call a lawyer. You know, I want to make a better forecaster. Who do I call?
Yes.
I want to analyse my gender pay gaps in HR. Who do I call?
Yeah.
And we fail this test, I think, big time. We can do so much, but people just don't realise, who do I call? They don't think statisticians. That's the way I view it. Do you see that, Shirley?
Yeah, it's a point there, actually, because I suppose one of their problems is the fact that stats is so widely applicable. So, you know, so talking about the gender pay gap, you know, if you went and called a statistician, you could get someone who was totally into pharmaceutical drug development or something, you know, and didn't have that versatility to be able to deal with that problem. So maybe the fact that we're so broad is one of the problems, you know, that there's a small amount of application in a wide area, so that you'd have to call a person who was an expert in gender pay gap or in basic sort of medians and analyses, but thinking statistically too. So who would you get for that? You'd need you know, it would be tricky. I mean, there aren't that many people that one could name, actually, apart from yourself. But that it is a good point. Maybe it's because stats is rather versatile, but also it is there is an element of statistics that it's very sneaky, isn't it? It's sort of subtle, you know. It's not always the obvious, as you've found with your work that you've done on gender pay gap. You know, you've got to think about it carefully and not just jump straight in because you get the wrong conclusions.
I wonder what this. Sorry, go on.
So I'm just saying something intrinsic about statistics that it is a little bit hard, I think.
I wonder what the society can do. I'm thinking about I was working somewhere else a few years ago, and this chartered engineer and said, who are you and what do you do? And I said, explain. I said, chartered statistician. And he'd no idea that there was such a thing as a chartered statistician. Completely at a loss as to why there should be chartered statisticians, which is it's very sad. But I think, maybe the society could do more, because the society did have a consultants register. I think I did join it, but not anymore. But would anybody think, would anybody think, I could, there's a society. I wonder if they've got a consultant who could help me, because this is the consultant I'm looking for. But would they naturally think, I'll go to the RSS to try and find out? I don't know.
Well, they could do. As Nigel says, there is a consultancy directory of, and CStats do say what their expertise is. So theoretically, if someone went, I'm not sure who the person would be that you'd contact in RSS, but no doubt you'd get put through to the right person, and they could give you a few names. But clearly, it's not something that people, feel is immediately obvious what to do. But it should be. Yeah. There isn't a directory like there is of plumbers, is there, I suppose?
Yeah, surprising. I've actually found it effective. I've had quite a lot of consultations out to the RSS directory. But a lot of that had been on the legal side as an expert witness. And so, if the lawyer has recognised, right, we need a statistician, and then I have had a lot of leads, particularly on that line, other leads as well. So it's interesting our different experiences there, Martin, on how that happened. So we do need to bring this to a close. It's been a fascinating session there, Shirley. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap this up?
Just thanks very much for inviting me to sort of go over all this stuff, and it's been a great pleasure thinking about it all and thinking about all the different applications and the different experiences. It's been a fabulous career option for me, so I was really pleased to have done it all, and it's been nice culminating, if you like, in this Greenfield Medal, so I was really pleased with it. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, and disappointing that not many people attended, but hopefully we'll get some more publicity so somebody else can watch it later on.